I started looking into what you guys do, I was like, I'm really looking forward to this. You know, you're an engineer, the pedigree of your background has been engineering, so
Yeah.
you can really enlighten us. But let's start off for anybody, amazingly, who doesn't
Yeah.
know what this story's all about already. Tell us who you are and what the
Yeah.
organization is all
And
about.
kind of get into it. So, well, video is the currency of the internet. And to kind of date myself, I started my career around internet innovation from grad school about the time the internet content revolution started, so around 2000.
Yeah.
And at that time, we could see that video was going to be a big deal. My first real job was in working in what we call application level multicast.
Yeah.
Kind of a geeky term, but it basically refers to how you might use software implementations to be able to distribute content in an efficient way. And at that time, the amount of video traffic we were talking about was, I don't know, 1/1000th of what it is today.
Yeah,
I don't know the actual stats, but over the course of the last 24 years, the entire internet has been reshaped by the foundations of video and its derivatives. And I've had the lucky privilege to be able to be involved in innovation throughout that. My first company, Aspera, was first of all, an idea, and then became a really, fortunately, successful implementation of a high speed, meaning highly performant way to move large file data around over the internet. And in the process of that, our number one market or number one use case was video, because it's big, difficult, and urgent.
Yeah.
And that experience, which we might talk about a little more as we get into the conversation, exposed me to the media supply chain in the full. And then most importantly, the distribution facet of it, because that's where the monetization is, that's where the consumption is. And what I mean by that is video streams going from their sources to eyeballs. There are many things to say about the foundations of technology behind that, but in short, that whole area hasn't innovated very much in a very long time, almost since 2000. And when I got the opportunity to do something new, coming out of Aspera, which we sold to IBM, myself and three of my friends, also engineering sorts, we had the motivation and concept to create a content native protocol that would attempt to go after the really big problems with video over the internet, and kind of placed where we thought that internet content was going. And that led to this company, Eluvio, and the Content Fabric Protocol. And we've been fortunate to run into some great partners like Bedrock. So here we are.
I want to understand more about Content Fabric, Michelle.
For sure.
You know, you've got some poetic terminology around what you do, how you do it, you know, looking through the website. Unpack how this technology works and what the philosophy behind it is to make it so effective, not just effective, but distinct as well.
From what has been before, right? So I think the most natural way to get your head around it is to think about what are the natural problems of what we would call the legacy way, right? And this gets a little technical. I'll try to keep it a little more high level, but most of what's been done to get video around the internet has led to a huge amount of redundancy. And what do I mean by that? Well, you look at media and the streams that we watch, a lot of it is the same thing, going to the eyeballs multiple times over, or mostly the same thing, being reconstituted in different ways. And there was a really profound talk given by one of the fathers of the internet at Google that I saw around 2010, 11, a guy named Van Jacobson. Those of us who follow the space know he's one of the big dudes, made the TCP congestion control protocol. He introduced a quantification of how much redundancy there really was in the traffic at that time. And it was so extreme that he made the hypothesis, he put forth this idea that we really need to start thinking of our content addressability and routing as a native function for content, as opposed to thinking about it as just opaque bytes routing around, so that we're not redundantly resending the same stuff reconstituted in many ways. his idea goes farther than just the network transmission. Because I was so involved in file transfer for so long, I knew, and my colleagues who were part of Aspera too knew, that this redundancy problem goes all the way back to the source. It's also in the storage, it's also in the workflows, and that there was also an economic underpinning to this, that the infrastructures of those times, like the more traditional clouds with egress charges and storage charges and microservice charges, were also taxing everybody off of this sort of file-based resending, retransmitting, all this reversioning. So that brings me to the point of the Fabric protocol. We made it to be content native and to make the representation of the content through from the source to the eyeball as efficient as it could be, meaning that instead of remaking all these versions upstream all the time and moving around all these files and building all these workflows to do it, we would make a smart in-network representation in software, kind of like we think of internet routing, that could grow infinitely and that would be open, that would allow you to get out the kind of outputs like streaming content and download content and all these forms of video from the raw materials in the network. And then you'd build it just in time through the software. And then the other idea that we had with this, which is very important to the times, is that data would be really fundamental to being able to produce what people want. And that was foreseeing where metadata was going, where AI was going. Little did we know that AI was going to flip like it has.
Yep.
So the second most important thing about the Fabric protocol, along with this idea of just keeping the raw material in the network and making outputs just in time, avoiding reduplication, is that data is in the media itself, in those objects, and it can then be used to make stuff that's personalized. And then we had one more, this is the third and the last important idea, which is that we followed what I'll call like content provenance and ownership rights. Myself, my friends who made this, we have a lot of experience with security. And we had grown tired of the fact that the content always had to be put in a secure box. And we thought a better way to do it is to make the content carry its own security, right? To be secure by design. We also knew about new technologies like blockchain-based cryptography, which was emerging in 2018, as people know, in a big way. And we thought that we could use those techniques to have the content be protected in the protocol. And so we ended up making a security model that's very novel, that lets the content be encrypted in the protocol so it can be on an open network with any nodes mixed in with any other media, and that the root of trust would be the publisher. And then to have a way that the cryptography would support the transmission and distribution so that you wouldn't lose the provenance, you wouldn't lose the ownership, that you could prove that source of trust, and that also you could protect the content. So when it's DRM'd, for example, a big thing in video, that you know that it's coming from the trusted source, and the way to get to the DRM version is a process that doesn't have to have any points of exposure, right? And so these are your three tenets. Make it compositional and efficient, make it data-driven, and then thirdly, make it so it's self-protecting and provenance preserving. So it's new for video, but it has been so far the right thing at the right time.
100%. When did this all start, Michelle?
Well, so ideas always start much earlier than the action upon them, as you know, of all people. I think Shaban and I, who were the first two founders, we had the original idea to go in this direction long before we left Aspera and IBM, probably 2012 or so, about that time, right? We worked on this, though, starting in the summer of 2017, also as the time Ethereum got serious. And then we incorporated the company and we made the first version of the protocol in an incubator with two of our friends over the span of 2018. And then 2019, we started to get our first commercial POC, and then we started to go out with it to introduce it and to try to get a few people adopting it or using it. So 2019 is when I think people started to learn about it. And then we got to a full commercial state just in the last 2 years. So.
And even if you think back 24 months, how far does it feel like you've come?
Oh, wow. So I would say, because of the original question you asked me, I've had the luxury to think about content on the internet since I started, right? My working career from about 2000. So I would say that this kind of space I've been growing into for now 24 years, as far as this particular idea, as soon as I realized myself that the cloud architectures, particularly for file-based I/O with video, were so poor, and I also realized that the CDNs hadn't changed very much in a very long period of time, and as I got more mature with customers who would come and talk about the economics of their problems with so much cost in the CDNs and clouds, those three things, right, really got to me and the things that motivate me. And I think that was the latter part of Aspera, because I was mature enough at that point to get the business.
Yeah. When you think about the dimension of this sector that CDNs and transmission occupies, the relevance of the topics that you've just mentioned, security particularly resonating with me, and then the kind of crescendo moment around AI, blockchain, all of,
AI especially, and we've just started to scratch the surface.
I agree. And that's what I want to ask you. You know, how much elasticity do you feel like there has been to accelerate you into the next chapter from all of those things coming together?
It's extraordinary. And I think you just said it. The elasticity is exactly the idea. So if there's one thing you try to do in engineering to get right, and that's architecture, right? Because architecture is the framework in which you can take a technology and let it grow to its full tilt. And I will use another company's example, the GPU.
Yeah. I know. Go on. Which
Jensen.
company are you going to say?
Jensen. NVIDIA.
Absolutely. I know them well.
NVIDIA is 30 years old.
Yeah.
NVIDIA in the last 2 to 5 years has become nearly the second, third highest value company in the world. 30 years old. That's the right architecture. When an architecture grows into manifestations that fit the times, and it can evolve itself that way. And our intent with the fabric, to your point, was to kind of make an architecture that could grow with where the world is going. And I will use the example of AI because we're deeply involved with it now, but it has accelerated hugely in just the last 18 months, even in obviously the world, but even in our own company and our customer base. Because the Content Fabric protocol puts data, and I mean at a frame-accurate, time-coded level with the media, it means that the AI can be with the content, which makes the efficiencies for doing deep learning with the content profoundly better. You don't move anything. Then the second thing that we think foresaw well in the architecture was that everything's dynamic. So when you want to get some streaming output, you can get personalization directly from the AI because it's built for that. And we're just scratching the surface on this and once what we call our customers, but the users start to see this potential, then their creative appetite unfolds and they come up with ideas and ideas and ideas that no one's ever done before, but the architecture will support it. And I'm very excited about this because I think we're at the precipice of what will be whole new formats of media and also efficiencies, which are good. They allow for natural reuse that's also creative.
Yeah. I want to ask you about, let's continue the anecdote around NVIDIA. I know NVIDIA really well. Jensen, the absolutely inspirational guy.
Yeah.
If you look at what's happened there and the way that they've become a de facto part of the vocabulary when anybody talks about infrastructures and AI now, looking through a lens of what your technology constitutes within the broadcast sector, how much do you think that you're going to be instrumental in transforming things from linear to digital first ecosystems?
Well, first of all, that depends very much on the adoption and also particularly partners and people that have huge footprints like Bedrock. That's why, in part, it's such a fortuitous partnership. And you can never look forward on these things. You can look back in hindsight in NVIDIA and know that the last 30 years were guided right, but you wouldn't have known that looking forward. So I think the basic answer to your question is that I don't know that. But what I do see that I think is true about this is that the needs of the industry right now have to do with, one, transformational need to get efficient. All media companies are struggling with maximizing profitability. And the other thing I know for sure, because I've worked in this space a long time, is they've been really trapped into certain architectures that they did not ask for and that have really forced upon let's say, an infrastructure heavy and complex way of doing video that is very expensive for them. It takes a lot of human beings. And then lastly, on top of that, doesn't give them a lot of flexibility to innovate forward. And in contrast to that, I know that the Fabric takes those two problems away. The first is that it's truly efficient, and the second is that there's no lock-in because it allows for all of the ease. It makes so many hard problems so much easier in video, and it also allows for doing a lot of new things, which breaks the barrier. Before us, there really wasn't a way, I don't think, to get out of what has been the last 15 years of, okay, let's go do it on the so-called public cloud, and let's also go to the 6 or 7 CDNs with this complicated file-based workflow on top.
You're touching on the commercial essence of the sentiment of the market at the moment, and we'd probably agree, Michelle, that if there's one thing that a lot of the organizations that exist need at the moment, it's healthier balance sheets with a better contribution to the bottom line.
Right? And an easier way, I would argue, too.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely. Ease to implement, ease to migrate over to, greater degree of assurance around the 3 characteristics that you'd mentioned as your triangulation earlier. Do you foresee that when the exposure and elevation, awareness of this gets to a certain point, that there's going to be a tipping point? Because that's how it feels to me. My intuition tells me that once people switch on to what the alternative is and how radically different it is, there's just going to be a massive rush towards the new thing. It's going to violate the space in terms of that layer of solutions.
Well, we've been very happy, to be honest, that it feels like that's starting to happen right now, because we do fortunately have many, many opportunities, and our early users and adopters are now able to become reference points for others. And I'm especially grateful to Jonas and Bedrock, because they're one of those companies that's really seen the large potential. So I think that's happening now. That said, I think that through all of this, the most important driver is what's going on in the world. And I was going to mention a example just a moment ago. We're involved in the accelerator program here at IBC around disinformation. How do we differentiate what's true and authentic media from fakes? And this problem is not only big, it's of global proportion, right? And societally changing. And one of the indicators of what you said is that there's now this huge draw and almost mandate to be able to easily present media in a way that shows its trust, that shows its authenticity, it's where it's coming from. Well, the Fabric protocol makes that super easy. You can do it right there with the verification in the browser. That's just like verifying the SSL certificate and the site you're visiting. And the fact that that's now, something that everybody's looking for, and then it's so natural in the Fabric, to me, is one of those tipping point moments. And we've had various broadcasters come to us and say that it's just one facet of what you're talking about. So I think that's the key, is what's going on right now. And then for us, we just try to respond to it, be ready, and also be mature in the technology. But I do think this is a tipping point moment.
It feels like that, Michelle, I have to admit, and I wish you the best of luck with it. In terms of exactly where you are now and the footprint of the business in more physical terms or commercial terms, where's the presence at the moment? What's the heat map of where you?
Where we are, for sure. So the Fabric is deployed today on, first of all, it's a software protocol. It runs on a network of nodes. What's a node? It's a host computer that is connected to the internet, basically. And that host computer provides compute and has a file system that the Fabric protocol uses to store the parts and to provide its services to the clients making requests, which might be for streaming, might be for downloads, might be for serving static content, whatever. where are those nodes? Today, they're in 15 data centers that we host around the world, so like a cloud.
Yeah.
It's a new type of cloud. And then on top of that, we've been lucky to have third-party companies contribute nodes too. I'll give you an example. This summer, we provided a new video service, streaming service for UEFA for the Euro 2024, streamed the 51 matches for the RIS service UEFA provided to their broadcast licensees. And the contribution feeds came to nodes that were hosted by Telstra in their data center. Telstra was the prime provider for the distribution service, and we provided all the HLS, global streaming, security, watermarking, the things we do. So in that case, you've got the fabric getting extended, and that was very agile. We extended it, added those additional nodes with Telstra just literally a week before things started up. And then also it's uniform deployment all over the world, and we had users of that service in many different countries. So that's how it works. And then the footprint, one of the interesting things for utility services is that the software gives guarantees of scaling. The guarantees are in both the timeliness of being able to do the transmission and what we would call packaging and playout, but also in how it scales with size and scale of the content. And we know that as we add nodes to it, scales linearly, can show that, which means that whenever we get bigger partners and we get bigger deployments, all that really needs to be done is create a more density of node footprint. I will say to your audience listening, this is very different than something like SETI at home, because people are used to the idea of contributing compute resources from concepts like that. But what makes the fabric really workable is the nature of the software and the fact that it's very deterministic and it has these properties, much more so than having sort of a peer-to-peer sort of brute force approach.
Yeah. Michelle, I'm going to ask you one more question in the time that I've got you before your busy schedule pulls you away from the studio. You've had an amazing career. You've achieved amazing things. You know, I know there's a lot of gravity associated to that for people when they look at you and your brand. If there's one piece of advice that you could give to the younger you, what would it be?
Oh, that's a hard question. I think the thing I think about the most, whether it's advice or not, is gratitude. I'm so grateful for everything that I get to work on. I'm so grateful that I've had the opportunities to do the things that I've been doing. I'm grateful that I am still in a place where I have the colleagues and the opportunities to continue to innovate forward. And that's what I keep foremost in mind.
Michelle, it's been an absolute pleasure to meet you here at IBC 2024 here on the Bedrock streaming stand. Thank you for being a guest on the OTTRed Spotlight podcast, and I hope it's the first of many times that we get to speak to each other.
Thank you so much.